This is level 2 of the CFA program and topic 1, ethical and professional standards, and the reading on guidance for standards 1 through 7. We're up to standard 6, conflicts of interest. And I must confess that this is probably my least favorite. You might remember, those of you who watched standard 5 recording, I said that was my most favorite. Now, that doesn't mean that it is more or less important to the CFA Institute, but it's my least favorite because I think there's lots and lots of gray areas in conflicts of interest. So we'll talk about disclosures and priority of transactions and referral fees. And from my perspective as a test creator, as a professor, I feel like I can ask lots and lots of really good questions where there's a fuzzy, cloudy, gray area in there. And we'll see that as we go through some of our examples. Once again, I'll just briefly show you the learning outcome statements for all 7 of the standards. We've seen these before. So let's go right and get into standard 6A, disclosure of conflicts. You know, we've heard that word many, many times, disclosure, throughout previous recordings. And so it's not surprising that we have a disclosure standard as it relates to conflicts of interest. So read that first part with me. Members and candidates must make full and fair disclosure, right? And so the idea here is that we need to make certain that if there is a conflict, that it doesn't impact our ability to make an objective or an independent analysis or recommendation. And so notice we have duties to clients and prospective clients and employers and probably to society in general as well. How about some guidance points here? Required to disclose potential and actual conflicts. That makes sense. Typical source is compensation structure that incentivizes short-term gains. When I think about this, I always go back to what I learned in graduate school, 1958. Of course, we'll talk about Modigliani and Miller when we have a capital structure discussion at some point in the program. And Modigliani and Miller taught us in 1958 that it's the responsibility of the executives acting as stewards of the shareholders' capital to maximize value, over the long term. And any short-term kind of a goal is pretty much a conflict there. So that's what I always think about, right? Let's make certain long-term value for the clients. And the cool thing about this is it swings back to the investment policy statement where we have risk and return objectives for the client and then a whole bunch of constraints. And the client says something like, here's all my money. I want to do these things. And so those things are typically long-term, like, buying a beach house, saving for retirement, paying for children's education and weddings, all that kind of stuff. That's long term. So we need to make certain here in this disclosure standard under conflicts of interest that we focus on the long term. Notice the last statement down there. If the conflict cannot be avoided, then complete disclosure is required. And complete means exactly what the word suggests, complete. Don't leave anything out. I think we have 5 of these areas that the Institute focuses on. So first one, disclosure of conflicts to employers. So we have a responsibility to make certain that not only does our supervisor know this, but the employer in general, including the compliance department, has knowledge of our potential or actual conflict. Of course, one of the main conflicts is this ownership of stocks or ownership, any kind of a partial or beneficial ownership in any kind of a financial security that might impact our ability to maintain independence. And then, when we craft these slides, we know my favorite word there, reasonable. So make reasonable efforts to avoid any potential conflicts. And this is what I was saying earlier when I said this is my least favorite standard because, boy, it's so difficult to determine if this is truly a potential conflict or might it be a potential conflict. And so a lot of times you're just sitting there scratching your head thinking, all right, is this or is this not a conflict? And that's why I've said to you many, many times, boy, it's really awesome to have both a formal and an informal culture of ethics so that, we could be standing around having a cup of coffee and say, hey, do you guys think this is a potential conflict? And we talk about it and we have opinions, and then we say consensus, yes or no, or maybe we have to ask somebody else. Remember, there's no shame in asking somebody else. Same kind of rules apply to disclosure of conflicts to clients, right? We need to just say, all right, this is what we're doing. This is where I have been. This is where I have ownership. Remember in the previous recording, I gave you the story about being a part-time mayor. And, so think about this. If you're a part-time mayor and you get compensated, but it doesn't take away your time and resources and your effort from your career as a financial analyst. But in your mayoral activities, you're going to come in contact with local businesses, of course, but maybe even some publicly held businesses and maybe larger privately owned businesses. So you might have private information, you might have some knowledge. Imagine if you're the mayor of a small town and you're part of the process of trying to build an airport nearby. And as part of your career, you're an airlines analyst. All right. So you have your responsibilities as the mayor. And so you're interviewing all these airlines and you're part of the decision to decide who gets the main hub, right? Which airline. So let's swing that back over to your career as an airline analyst. Boy, there's lots and lots of conflicts in there as far as I'm concerned. All right. Some examples that the Institute mentions here. Directorships or consulting arrangements, right? Investment banking activity, and then some kind of direct or indirect ownership of stock, whether or not it's substantial or pecuniary. There's that word again, reasonable efforts to identify and disclose. So we need to have some additional disclosures, fee arrangements, non-standard fee structures, and sub-advisory relationships. That makes sense, right? How about cross-departmental conflicts? This goes back to my mayor example, right? Where the mayor out here, now that's of course external. Here we're talking about internal conflicts, right? Potential and actual conflicts because, let's face it, even though we're here in 2020 and 2021, we experienced the COVID shutdowns and lockdowns. So I always think of these as conflicts with other parts of the building. So we're working in this part of the building and somebody else is working in that part of the building, whatever that means in times of COVID. But surely we're friends or friendly or acquaintances with those people over there, and we're going to meet in the hallways or we're going to have lunch together, and they're going to say something like, boy, I'm working on this. It would be really helpful if you would issue a report, favorable or unfavorable or however it works. So pressure from different sides of the building. I do like what we put down there in the red block. A communication policy may require members of the two departments to communicate only through an intermediary, which means that we're not going to meet each other in the hallway and we're not going to have lunch together. Boy, that sounds like a strict standard to me. However, remember, we owe a duty to, our employers and our clients, and then to other people out there, of course, but we need to make sure that we avoid conflicts of interest. Stock ownership, so we need to disclose any material beneficial ownership, and that of course means that if we're an analyst and we own shares ourselves, that makes perfect sense. That's a conflict. But if our husband or wife owns shares, or our aunt or uncle, or someone as a present for the birth of our first child gives them 10,000 shares of one of these airline stocks that I was talking about a few minutes ago, we probably should report that. Conflicts as a director. This is awesome to become a board member, right? However, we're going to have some potential conflicts there, not least of which is the simple fact that we'll probably be privileged to material non-public information. So we need to be super sensitive about that. But it's awesome being a director, and of course we're going to get paid for it, and we just need to make sure that everybody knows about it. And then we need to make sure that everybody knows, hey, I'm sitting on this board or these series of boards, and these are my responsibilities. And I think this is a great company, and I've done an independent analysis, et cetera, et cetera. All right, how about a summary here? Recommended procedures. All right, disclose special compensation arrangements. That makes sense. Boy, there's, if such disclosures are not permitted, then we should dissociate from this activity. We talked about that in a previous recording. Share information on compensation structures. That makes sense. Avoid any potential or actual conflicts, especially if they cannot be avoided. All right, so let's see what's happening here. We've got Jeffrey, CFO, been approached by Axion Corporation to promote its publicly traded stock. Axion offers to pay Clark a higher than average commission. Ooh, higher than average. Boy, I wonder what that means. Does it mean 5% higher? Does it mean 50% higher? Does it mean 100? Does it mean double? At some point in there, here's that gray area that I was talking about. 5% is probably okay. 100%, I'm not quite sure that would be okay. But higher than average commission. But then let's see what this guy does. He ensures that all his clients and the firm's compliance department are aware of the additional compensation offered by Axion. All right, so has he violated this particular standard? Just this standard, right? And so the answer is, probably not, because he abided by the rules of disclosure. So he fully disclosed to both the clients and his employer through the compliance department. And so the idea is that, the clients can say, all right, we believe this guy because he's disclosed it and we trust him. That makes sense. And then the employer has the necessary information. So, of course, someone's going to come along and say, all right, what are you doing for this other company? How is it impacting any reports or any kind of recommendations that you make? And, of course, we're open to be evaluated. I always say to my colleagues and to my supervisors, I'm like, hey, come to my class and sit in on my class and watch me. Come and do it anytime you want. You don't even have to tell me that you're coming. Just pop in. The old Seinfeld pop in. All right, how about part B here, priority of transactions. Now, we have had a conversation about fair dealing, and so this is probably kind of a subset of that earlier standard, although it does warrant its own standalone process. So investment transactions for clients and employers must have priority. Of course, they must have priority over anything that is going to benefit the analysts. And there's the guidance there. Must always take priority. All right. And what is the idea behind this is to avoid potential clients, right? If we're always first in line, whether we're the direct owner or the beneficial owner, if we're always first in line to trade, well, clearly there's something inappropriate about that, and that's a violation. So we want to make sure that the clients are not disadvantaged and that the member or the candidate does not benefit personally from trades taken on behalf and being first in line or third in line or whatever it is. And then, of course, what was that standard on professionalism? We did that, a bunch of videos ago. We need to make sure that we know relevant knowledge of the laws, knowledge of the regulations. And so some municipalities, some countries may have certain laws that says something like, hey, if you do this, this is against our Constitution, and you'll pay a fine, or you may be incarcerated, or whatever that is. So make sure we know all those laws. That's part of professionalism, which leads right into this avoidance of conflicts of interests. Yeah, personal trading, secondary to trading for clients. Right. Look at that second teardrop point. Personal investments or transactions must never lead to unfavorable outcomes for clients. Boy, that really sounds like a strict standard to me. Here, what about non-public information? Going back to our position as a mayor, right? We might know something about the airline industry. We might know something about a particular airline who's going to become a part of this hub. And so there's no way that we're supposed to share this with our employer or our clients or anybody else. What is that last teardrop point? We're prohibited from sharing these details. Now, of course, if we have beneficial ownership, it doesn't mean that we can't trade, but we need to make sure that we allow all the clients and our employers time to try to figure out what this means, right? So there has to be a time lag between when we take an investment action that provides us with some kind of beneficial ownership so that the clients can figure it out, right? So there's always that time lag to figure it out. I'm a big fan of that term, figure it out. It's kind of a big picture term, but that's really essentially what our challenge in life is. Family accounts, what did I say earlier about our child who was just born? 10,000 shares of a big company, right? Should be treated like any other client account. So even though it's our son or daughter, we're not giving that particular account any special treatment. How about some recommended procedures here? Limiting participation in IPOs. And IPOs, they're fascinating animals to study and to observe and to watch over time to see, 10 minutes after trading begins, they're up by 1,000%. And then 5 days later, they're down by 500%. No, not 500%. How about 50%? Right. So I like this italics, avoiding participation in IPOs altogether. Right. Allow the IPO to trade. Allow all those other people out there to bid the price up and bid the price down. And then if we believe in this stock, right, if we do fundamental analysis and we do macroeconomic analysis and we like this particular company, we'll probably like it in some time period in the future, like, I don't know, a month or 3 months. And so this should all be a part of the procedures that are outlined by the firm. Restricting participation in private placements. I like the italics here. Strict limits should be placed on this. Whenever I hear about private placements, I always go back to 1997, maybe 1998. You guys rock and roll people. David Bowie issued a bond. I think it was in the amount of $55 million. It was the insurance company Prudential who brought this I think it was the sole investment banking firm. I think David Bowie wanted to buy out his partner for $30 million or something, and then he used the other $20 million to build a recording studio or whatever. And he promised a coupon rate. It was around 8%. I forget the exact number. I think it was over 10 years. And as I recall, I'm pretty sure that Prudential held on to these bonds for their entire 10 years of maturity. I don't think anybody ever got them. So I'm not sure if it was intended to be a private placement, but it ended up being a private placement. And then Moody's or Standard & Poor's downgraded these bonds like in 2002 or 2003 because of the internet, right? We had Napster and then all these other places where there were free file sharing, and so that cut into David Bowie's profits. But all of those coupon payments were made on that. So I think about that when private placements. Not sure if that has any value to you in preparing for the exam. However, just remember strict limits. And then, of course, the next step, blackout or restricted periods. This is kind of what I was hinting with in my discussion with the IPO above. Establish reporting procedures. Of course, this is all part of this culture of ethics. So we have this procedure, right? Look on page 29. There it is. And this is what we do. And then disclosing policies regarding personal trading to clients upon request. Of course, if our client says something like, hey, where are you investing? Then we should probably let them know. All right, here we have Benjamin, a research intern. Compliance officer, Regina, responsible for monitoring. All right, so what's in bold there? She investigates Cook's personal trades and finds that Cook has made significant profits by short selling stocks just before they were put on the firm's sell list. Oh boy, there's a bunch of stuff going wrong inside of that one sentence. In addition, Benjamin has omitted several of his personal transactions, failed to submit his personal trading forms over the last 2 months. So look at the question down in the blue block. Have either of these individuals violated this standard? Well, of course, seems like there's tons of violations in there. So let's go ahead and work through these, right? By placing his personal trades before the clients, of course, Cook violated that standard. The supervisor violated a previous standard that we talked about before by allowing Cook to continue his duties without accurate and infrequent submission of his personal transaction form. And then, of course, there's something else about material, non-public information that could have been a violation. And in fact, you can imagine that inside of this question stem on an exam, there's embedded a host of other kinds of violations. How about part 3, referral fee? So we must disclose to the employer, to the clients, and prospective clients, right? As appropriate, any compensation, consideration, or benefit. Now, why are these important? Let me go back to that one of my favorite words. Now, you know my favorite word is reasonable here, but one of my other favorite words, I say this because as a parent trying to teach my children integrity, right? So what's our goal? Our goal is to have integrity, right? Which means that we cannot be influenced by anybody out there, whether they're coming from this side of the supply chain or that side of the supply chain. We need to produce unbiased recommendations, right? And so disclosure of referral fees is just all part of that. Now, what if we receive a referral fee? So we need to communicate before we enter into a contract. That makes sense, right? And then disclose the terms of that fee structure. And then when we pay a referral fee, we must disclose when they pay that fee, right? So let's work through an example here. So here we have Brittany, research department at an investment bank. She receives compensation for each referral she makes to the brokerage department, right? She refers numerous clients to the brokerage and states to those clients, I receive a certain compensation for referring to the brokerage department. All right, so that's a perfectly legitimate exam question. So here's a disclosure, right? So I receive certain compensation for referring you. So that sounds to me an awful lot like, hey, we're disclosing. But somewhere in there, right? Somewhere in there, you're thinking to yourself, oh, that doesn't sound like full disclosure that we talked about earlier. So have we violated this? Yeah. Failing to disclose the amount and nature of the compensation. So even though, make sure you're aware of this on the exam, even though there is a disclosure, it might only be a partial disclosure. So this sounds to me like a great potential exam question. Hey, let's get you tempted to say, oh yeah, there's disclosure, but let's make sure it's full disclosure. So look what we have in that third orange arrow point, disclose all referral compensation. And I think that takes us all the way through the standard. One more to go.